No.
Okay, so we are going to start right away, and I've transferred the host to you, Karuna. Thank you everyone for joining this afternoon. Thank you again for coming to this legal surgery. This is the second of this program. We want to thank everyone for joining us for the second time. On behalf of Time to Heal, we want to especially welcome who's joined us today. Today we'll be discussing a very interesting topic, which is how the law can better protect victims and survivors of domestic abuse. And the person who will be doing justice to this discussion today is Karuna. But before she comes on stage, I want to thank Holly for her presentation last week. It was really wonderful. And I will also invite our mommy, Reverend Abiola Kran, to give us a few opening remarks. Then we'll hand over to Karuna. Once more, Camilla, if you could, it seems I made you the host. If you could transfer it to Karuna, that'd be good. Thank you so much. Over to you, Ma, while we're trying to sort out the host part of it.
Thank you very much, everyone. You're welcome again this afternoon. And I would like to say thank you for your time, especially all our facilitators. I know that this thing is not easy at all. I told Lawson yesterday that he should just count me out of any presentation now because I'm just getting a little bit exhausted. We've been having a meeting for the past 26 days consistently. So I'm even thinking now, maybe we will have to move the events we have in the coming week, maybe later to the end of the month. So I've said all this to show you how much I'm so appreciative on behalf of the Board of Trustees and the management of the organization. Thank you, everyone, and let's enjoy ourselves today.
Thank you so much, Ma, for that welcome. I will appreciate that so much. Thank you so very much. We will go straight away to the presentation today. Again, let me, Camilla, if you could hear me, I transferred the host to you. So help me give to Karuna so that she can see the screen. All right, so we welcome Karuna to give us her presentation today. On behalf of Time to Heal, Karuna, thank you so much for agreeing to do this presentation. At the end of the presentation, there will be a session for questions and answer and contribution from everyone. So feel free to let us know your questions. You can type the question on the chat and then we'll be able to also read it from there. Thank you. Over to you.
Remy, can you mute your mic? Would you mute your mic?
Waiting for access to share my screen.
Yeah, Camila, can you transfer, please? Sorry.
Is it me? No.
You click on the name, click on Karuna's name, and then you will see an option that says make.
All right. Okay.
Yeah.
So. Oh me. Sorry. Look at the participants.
Yeah, click on the participants, then you look for Karuna S. Click on the
Karuna S.
Yes.
What does it say? What do I click on after this? Sorry.
You look for more.
I've got Karuna S.
Yes. You click on the
Do I do mute?
No, the second option.
Option.
And or more, something like that. Should be a drop-down button where you can make hosts.
Oh, I don't know.
That-
Okay.
Is this
Have you seen
is
it?
that it?
Okay, okay.
Huh?
It's been transferred
Is
to
that the right thing?
Reverend
No.
Croft. So you can transfer to Karuna, please.
Karuna.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. She's now the host.
Thank you so much. All right, Karuna, over to you.
Oh, yes. I've got it. Yes. Thank you.
Okay, so we're going to talk today about how law can be better for victims and survivors of domestic abuse. I've got some few information which I would like to share with you. At any given moment, I have the power to say this is not how the story is going to end. It's just a quote from Christine Miller. What is domestic abuse? I won't go too much in detail since we've already discussed about this in the last presentation, but this can affect, domestic abuse can affect men, women, both in straight and gay relationships, regardless of their religion, culture, or class. And it is abuse carried out by partners or ex-partners, and it is emotional, psychological, physical, sexual, or financial. Domestic Abuse Scotland Act 2019, the new act makes all domestic abuse towards a partner, whether psychological or physical, a criminal offense. Offenders could face up to 14 years in the prison, and the new law also provides an aggravation to the offense where the behavior is carried out in the presence of a child. The act is designed to provide a gold standard of protections for victims in Scotland. Those who suffer from domestic abuse may never experience physical violence at the hands of their partner. Instead, they are subjected to coercive control, degrading treatment, or a loss of liberty on a daily basis, which can be equally as damaging on partners, children, families as physical abuse. While the new legislation undoubtedly offers greater protection on victims, there are challenges to ensure it is applied effectively. Services that come into contact with victims of domestic abuse, such as the police, require extensive training to fully understand the offense, as these abuses mostly happen behind closed doors, and gathering evidence can be often problematic. Now we can talk about some of the challenges. Reality of many victims of abuse struggling to access the support they need. More needs to be done to improve recognition and disclosure of domestic abuse. In cases of emotional or financial abuse, many victims don't recognize the behaviors they are exposed to as even constituting abuse. Victims face emotional and practical barriers to disclosing abuse, and this can be more pronounced for individuals with specific or complicating issues. Male victims, LGBT individuals, those with English as a second language or with learning difficulties or mental health problems can struggle to access specialist support and can face additional barriers to disclosure. Following disclosure, some victims face barriers to accessing legal support as well as addressing the practicalities of living a relationship. Fleeing abuse is not simply an act of will. It requires financial and practical ability to leave or take action. Victims need to know, where can I go and what will I live on? Legal aid restrictions, both in terms of evidence requirements and income or asset thresholds requiring financial contribution, leave large number of victims giving up on their rights to justice. In some cases, these restrictions expose victims to risk, leaving no alternative but to represent themselves in the court facing their perpetrator. The Scottish Women Aid charity said it's convinced that Scotland's so-called demand-led system of legal aid simply does not work for children and women. They struggle to access legal aid, and when they do so, solicitors often have no grasp of the dynamics of domestic abuse and can sometimes offer inappropriate, harmful advice. Dr. Marcia Scott, the chief exec of Scottish Women Aid, also said women, children, and young people experiencing domestic abuse are told every day that justice applies to them, and they discover every day through lack of access to vital services that in fact it doesn't. At Scottish Women Aid, they also have been hearing for decades a lot of problems getting legal support and services they need. They tell horrific stories of poor and no service, and that they cannot afford a lawyer. Children being treated as pawns by abusers in civil processes, through routinely violate children's right. Lawyers telling women not to mention the domestic abuse because sheriffs don't want to hear about it, and then being accused of changing their story in the subsequent proceedings. Refuge is also not accessible, and local authority responsibility to house victims fleeing abuse does not always materialize on the ground. The challenge of housing or financial security can be particularly acute where there are joint assets that victims struggle to access or dissolve with their partner's consent. There are numerous cases where victims seeking help who feel trapped without finance or accommodation, deemed ineligible for state support because of their assets, but requiring state support to be able to access those assets. The picture can be particularly complicated where there have been financial abuse within relationships. Simply put, despite admirable positive steps over recent years, more needs to be done if the government wants to honor its commitment to support those fleeing abuse. A brief series of implications for policymakers, national and local campaigners, as well as other referral services could be: financial and emotional abuse need to be better articulated. Many victims are unaware of their experiences constitute abuse. The recent introduction of the coercive and controlling behavior as a criminal offense will only be effective if it is accompanied by public education and practical definitions for police and prosecution. Policies which affect benefits, deaths, or housing needs to better consider the needs of the victim of abuse. The evidence demonstrate how victims can be trapped in cycle of abuse because their vulnerable status is not properly recognized under or across different policy silos. Despite explicit responsibility for local authorities to provide housing for victims and domestic abuse, there are cases where this fails to materialize. Access to accommodation, legal aid, or emergency benefits is complicated where victims have assets that they cannot fully access because of risk of abuse. Despite different policies are considering victim needs, policy commitments need to be evident on the ground. There are many situations where individuals feel trapped and unable to escape their perpetrators because of practical barriers to accessing housing and finance. A universal credit which is rolled out widely. Government must really monitor the impact of single payment policy has on domestic abuse cases. Paying all the monthly household finances to one individual have inherent risk of people in abusive relationships, allowing perpetrators to take complete control of the finances. Financial institutions must develop consistent guidelines to allow victims to detangle their assets from abusers safely. The Financial Conduct Authority should work with other stakeholders to develop agreed best practice guidance to work with victims of abuse. They should include providing their clients with appropriate leeway, sensitive treatment, self-communication, procedures of freezing, splitting, and rearranging finances without putting victims at risk or forcing them to engage with the abuser. The Ministry of Justice should revise evidence, requirement, and financial contribution for legal aid. Now, legal aid restrictions are blocking victims of domestic abuse, seeking justice and exercising their rights. Evidence requirement must be such that individuals suffering any type of abuse and unable to access finance can access legal aid. More thought needs to be given to financial thresholds in the cases of joint assets and potentially fluctuating income across insecure relationships. Civil society needs to be better equipped to recognize, support, and refer victims of domestic abuse. Now, domestic abuse is widespread in our society, yet specialist professionals only engage with a very small percentage of victims. There is more scope of equipping and coordinating the efforts of civil society to support victims, giving the emotional and practical barriers to disclosing abuse. A family member, friend, colleague, or engage with the majority of victims in the country. Now the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic. During this time of state-sanctioned COVID-19 lockdown and social distancing, there have been and will be considerable risk that domestic abuse has become more hidden and that legal process will stall. There is worldwide concern that the confinement of individuals in their homes during this period of high tension and considerably economic uncertainty is aggravating abusive behavior and giving rise to more opportunities for surveillance, isolation, micromanagement, and control. The potential effect of abuse on victims may also be more profound at this time for a number of reasons. There will be far fewer periods of delay where the perpetrator or victim are at work. It may be more difficult to access medical care or support, and there will be a fewer opportunities to escape. In addition, there may be further barriers to seeking support or police assistance in the first place. The horrifying fact that domestic abuse appeared to double in the first 3 weeks of the lockdown, for an average 2 women per week to an average of 5. In recognition of the increased risk and in light of evidence of escalating domestic abuse in the countries where lockdown began earlier than in the UK, the Scottish Government announced on March 31st that it was to provide more than 1.5 million in extra funding to Scottish Women Aid and Rape Crisis Scotland. The provision of extra funding to both of these organizations reflect the reality of sexual violence is a common feature of domestic abuse and, contrary to common perception, often occurs between individuals who are in a relationship with one another. The UK government has also announced an additional 2 million in funding for domestic abuse services and launched the You Are Not Alone campaign. Funding to help ensure access to support services is essential, and there are likely to be particular challenges with accessing support and emergency assistance during the periods of lockdown and social isolation. While many jurisdictions have reported a surge in calls to domestic abuse helplines, initial figures in Scotland indicated a fall in the volume of calls, which it has been speculated may be due to the reluctance or inability to call when the abuser or children are at home. In addition to victims not only being able to safely access support service or call for emergency assistance during being under increased surveillance, the police and support services will be under great strain. General uncertainty about what the investigation and future court proceedings will entail may also have a negative impact on reporting, as might the presence of children in the home. In order to legally count as domestic abuse, abusive behavior does not have to occur in domestic setting. Under Scots law, it is the relationship between the parties rather than the location of the abuse that matters. In Scotland, formal legal requirement of corroboration is requiring that each essential fact in a case is supported by 2 independent pieces of evidence. Securing corroboration in domestic abuse cases is challenging at the best of times, and the current situation may impact upon the nature and availability of the corroboration evidence in several ways. Depending on the living arrangement, may you live in a detached house, a tenement block, evidence from neighbors may also be more important, as this will be more likely to overhear altercations and to be at home to give witness statements when the police conduct local investigation. While it is possible that neighbors may be more reluctant than normal to with the police on face-to-face due to the concern about transmission of the virus. GP surgeries are now only offering phone or virtual appointments. There may be a reduced likelihood of GP picking up on signs of abuse. All of this may have a knock-on effect on the usefulness of medical reports as evidence. Despite Scotland having robust statutory protection in place for those fleeing abuse in the home, it women. However, likely due to the increased demand, additional is currently related to this caution. In Scotland. In 2014, it was highlighted that the domestic abuse cases could take up to 6 to 9 months for a first trial diet, with the further lengthy delays following adjournments. More recently, commentators have suggested, as a new 2018 Act beds in, against an already high volume of domestic abuse cases, pressure upon courts, time and resources more likely to increase. The pandemic has now resulted in considerable upheaval to court business. On the 19th March, joint statement between the Lord Advocate and the Chief Constable of Police Scotland, it was stated that the Crown Office of Procurator Fiscal Service will continue to process cases. It will also state the focus going forward will be on cases where the accused is in custody, as well as some non-custody cases relating to domestic abuse, sexual violence. Various emergency measures were introduced in the Coronavirus Scotland Act 2020 to respond to the disruption to the court business, including extending certain time limits applicable to the criminal proceedings, provisions to facilitate court attendance by electronic means, and additional grounds for admission for hearsay evidence. However, it is clear that summary court business has been adjourned and otherwise significantly disrupted, and no new solemn trials are going ahead. Indeed, questions remain on how solemn cases will be handled during the pandemic. Concern has been raised over substantial case backlogs resulting from this period, with Scottish courts and tribunal services estimating that by August 2020, there will be a minimum of 1,600 solemn trials outstanding. The impact of the delays, the detrimental impact of case delays upon victims is serious, has previously been recognized in Scotland as something which affects the continued engagement of victims in their criminal justice system. It is generally recognized that it is important for domestic abuse cases to go to trial quickly to minimize the risk of the complainant retracting and disengaging from the process. Additional time between the incident and the trial also creates further opportunity for the perpetrator to intimidate the victim. These circumstances are likely to cause considerable uncertainty and stress for victims, some of whom may then choose to retract and change their evidence. The criminal courts in Scotland are currently undergoing a period of significant adjustment. Trial delays give rise to considerable issues across the board, and in the context of domestic abuse, led to concern about continued victim engagement. Clear communication to those affected is important in order to maintain victim confidence in the system going forward. At a broad level, there is still uncertainty and questions about getting trials up and running effectively during the pandemic, and the full effect of the emergency measures, including in the 2020 Act, remains to be seen. While the 2020 Act generally suspends requirement of physical attendance at court, it does not apply to trial diets. While it is not yet clear how this will work in practice, an interesting potential issues will be the intersection between the provisions of 2020 Act and existing measures for vulnerable witnesses. The experience of children in this whole pandemic and also during domestic abuse. Certain concern arise that children may be increasingly exposed to domestic abuse. During the pandemic, the period of lockdown and social distancing measure, there will be concerns about children being the direct target of abuse within the homes too. This is an area where modernization of law on the horizon in Scotland, but is also worth making the point that there is a well-established co-occurrence between domestic abuse and child abuse. Children in the household where there is domestic abuse are more likely to be victims of child abuse and neglect. There is increasing recognition that children do not simply witness domestic abuse, but rather they experience it in a variety of ways, whether through trying to intervene to protect a parent, dealing with the aftermath or being used as a part of the abuse itself. Research shows that exposure to domestic abuse has negative physical, mental, psychological, and developmental effects on children. So in conclusion, domestic abuse is a distinctly harmful offence, and tackling it has been recently the front and centre in Scottish Government's justice agenda. While the full impact of COVID-19 pandemic and lockdown social distancing measures on Scotland's criminal justice responses to domestic abuse remain to be seen, it is regrettably inevitable that current circumstances will intensify existing challenges involved with protecting victims and improving justice outcomes. The economic and social costs for domestic abuse are staggering, costing the Scottish public purse an estimate of 2.3 billion per year and 66 billion in England and Wales. This figure includes costs associated with the NHS for medical treatment, including mental health provision, social services, and housing. All services that are presently under intense strain. To ensure that the human and economic cost of domestic abuse does not spiral out of control, it is therefore crucial that tackling domestic abuse remains high on Scottish Government's agenda in these unprecedented times. The vast reduction in civil court business and delays to criminal cases risk jeopardizing progress and may put victims of domestic abuse at increased risk. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much, Karuna, for that wonderful presentation. I think that was very, very, very insightful and informative. Thank you so much. I've particularly picked up some points for myself. I'm sure everyone listening has also got one or two things that they have learned from this presentation today. You made a very, very powerful point from the beginning that seeking for help is not a weakness. I want to re-echo that point. You know, seeking for help is not a weakness. You just need to realize that it makes you stronger, actually. So please, anyone listening to us and anyone who will be watching this subsequently, realize that when you're seeking for help, it's not a sign of weakness at all. Look out for help and then you will get it. There are different help mechanisms and support channels that you can get. Reach out to us and we'll be happy to help. Another point that you made before I call for questions, I know everyone will have one or two things to say. So you made a very powerful point again that without a wider society playing a role, we risk failing to engage with the majority of victims in the country. It's very important that the wider society plays a role. Everyone has a role to play, and the law has to capture that wider spectrum of issues to have a very holistic solution to domestic abuse menace. So having said that, I would like to invite anyone who has comments and then questions from the legal support team. You just want to add to the point already made, or something struck you in the presentation that you want to highlight on, or you seek clarity on, then this is the time to do that. And you can unmute your microphone. If you're not speaking, you mute your microphone for the moment. So any questions or comments?
Yes, can I say that when I went to Tesco's, on my bill, they actually, I don't know if you can see that, maybe it's the other way around, they actually say on the bottom of my bill, help is available if you're experiencing domestic abuse. Call Refuge National Domestic Helpline 0808 2000247, and they give you a website and a place where you can download to Bright Sky app. So I thought that was to put that on their receipt if anyone was going through a really bad time.
Yeah, thank you so much, Camilla, for that. That's very, very helpful and useful. Please take note of those contacts, and if you need it subsequently, you can reach out to us as well, and we'll be able to give you the contact. Is there anyone who wants to add more add more feedback or questions? While we're waiting for that, another point that Karuna highlighted, which I think is very key to remember for anyone listening. She did mention that location of an abuse does not matter, especially in Scotland. The location of the abuser or where both parties live does not necessarily matter. What the law looks at is the relationship between them. That's a very powerful point to remember. The fact that you're in Scotland and, for example, that you're in Aberdeen and the person is living in Edinburgh or Glasgow and the abusive conduct is happening, the location doesn't matter. The relationship is key. Can you shed more light on that, Karuna, if you want to give more explanation? Can everyone hear me?
No, I can't hear.
I think
Oh, sorry, I was on mute.
I can hear you.
I can hear you.
Yeah. So like Lawson said, location doesn't matter. Like especially the abuse can be physical or mental, psychological. So basically, the distance. If you're in a relationship and your partner may be far away, not living in the same household, but trying to really harm you mentally as well, it is considered as a domestic abuse. So it doesn't matter. You have to be physically present in the same abuse. With the abuse is classed as where you're physical and mental. So that kind of explains where the location is not the priority in Scotland. It doesn't matter. Present in the same house, if that makes sense.
Yes, it does. Thank you so much. Thank you. Yes, it does. While we are, please do let me know if you have questions. You can just indicate by raising your hand on the, there's a way you do that. I will drop a message on the chat box and then I'll be able to, yes.
Could I ask Karuna?
Yes,
you know, you said the trauma for children, you know, that they can experience different things in many ways, like physical, mental effects. Now, is there counselling and that for children of domestic abuse? Would you know?
Like domestic abuse, I mean, when you contact them when you have cases about domestic abuse, they also cover up, I believe, the cases where you can share about child abuse as well, or trauma the child is going through, because it is linked with when there's a abuse taking place, the child is present there and the child is listening to this, or a child is present. So I believe it is kind of covered, and maybe Lawson might have some more insight. I'm not well versed if there is a specific place where you could go to get more information and counseling for that, but I'm sure there is something, and I can get back on that and look into it. There are various charities who actually support counseling as well, and the government also offers, I believe, but I'm not at the moment exactly in the right direction which exact site or place is it, but I'm sure there is definitely provision for that, because it plays a major role, and that's why it is highlighted when there's a child present during a domestic abuse. It aggravates the process, and it helps, and the abuser can actually get a larger sentence because of the child going through that phase of domestic abuse as well. So it is.
You said they can use them. You said they can use the child as a pawn. So it was also that I found that could be very damaging. And if the child goes through this process, you know, if they can get a good counsellor to get them through it, because it might affect them through their school life as well as their home life.
Yeah, definitely, because when there are two people involved, a partner, like the parents are fighting, and they could be a physical or even abusive or a verbal abuse, and the child is actually going through and would try to intervene and might get hurt, or obviously the child is innocent, he doesn't understand, and he for him both his parents are equally important, and obviously seeing them in that state is traumatizing, and it is quite a serious thing, because that can have adverse effect on the child's future, not being able to live that normal life, being scared. And that is really important, because it's a very good thing that the Scottish law protects the child, because it's very important for their future. They are just starting their life, and this is not they should see or witness, and it's going to have a bad effect for their future as well.
Thank you very much.
Sorry, just on that point, I don't know if it applies to Scotland, but in England, so my mum is a social care caseworker, and she visits children in their homes who are experiencing abuse. But prior to that, she actually worked as a what's called a play therapist, and she was contracted by the government to work in local authority schools, and the schools and the teachers would refer certain students to work with her, and she'd do play therapy with them as a form of counselling, rather than your typified sitting there and I guess a counsellor talking to you about, I guess, how you feel. But she would kind of work with them through play and understand, I guess kind of prepare them in a way if they were in an abusive household. So I know that's definitely the case in England, but if a school is aware, they can refer children to certain services, and they can get extra funding as well from the government to support things like getting them play therapy while at school.
If I can also make a comment, we were trying to actually start something for the children before the lockdown began. Future Gem Club. It's a club that is supposed to take care of children who have witnessed or who either experienced domestic abuse or who have witnessed domestic abuse. So we're still working with it, how we can start an online club with them, because this year we are not planning to, except things change, we're not really planning to have anything in our center as physical activities this year. So we very much have that in our plan, and we hope it's going to. We've had one or two, a few cases where we have been involved with some children, but in a structured form. We are about to start something that will make people to actually attend, just like we are doing now. It will be for children. And we are planning for, we were planning, I wouldn't say we're still, because I don't know, we're just trying to do a lot of restructuring and restructuring with this COVID now. We had wanted to have a summer school, whatever, vacation class training for children who had been through domestic abuse, and also to be like an awareness something. So I do hope in the nearest future, not too long from now, we'll be able to kickstart something very formal, especially now with this our legal aid team. Because, you know, when it comes to working with children, a lot is involved more than just the deliveries. We need to be able to get everything right and compliances. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, for those very, very useful feedback. Thank you. And just to add to that, if you've seen the chat, there is a message from Tim and on the guidance regarding coronavirus situation. If anyone wishes to look more and read more what the Scottish government has in terms of guidance and support, the link has been provided by Tim on our page. More information is there. And to also mention, next week, in terms of posting people's support, next week, we will be discussing on the support mechanisms available at the Citizen Advice Bureau. So one of our team member will be doing a presentation next week, Saturday. So I will encourage us to come as well. You may have one or two things to touch on the children's support. So that is that.
Okay.
You've mentioned the point, Karuna, before I open up the floor again. it's one of the challenges that we have in terms of law is the delay in trials. We have some delays in trials, especially when you have victims taking up cases to court. So we have delays in trial. I want to open up that question to everyone, and especially the members of the legal support team, Holly, Karen, and everyone there. How can victims and survivors of domestic abuse navigate through these delays in trial, and what can be done to make it a better situation? Like you rightly pointed out, when cases are delayed, what happens during that period of delay? So what can we do best? How can the law protect victims in that situation?
I think I don't know if it's something necessarily that we could perhaps do to help, but I know that when the Crown Prosecution Service will charge someone with an offence, when there's that kind of 6 to 9 month wait for trial, they are eligible to implement like a non-harassment order. So it means that the perpetrator can't access the victim or speak to the victim ahead of the case, and that kind of ties into what Karuna was saying around they can intimidate victims, or they can harass them, or they're more likely to retract their statements. So those non-harassment orders that the police and the CPS can implement ahead of trial in that kind of lull period is really helpful for that, because they're much more likely to be intimidated or harassed and retract their statements. And obviously they're the kind of primary witness to what's going on. So I know they're particularly helpful.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Holly. I think that's very, very important. I wanted that point to be made, and you just touched it very well. So it's important that victims and survivors who have cases in court remember that there is what is called non-harassment order, which can be secured. If the court, I don't expect we should be, if the court by chance does not remember that, so victims can actually apply for that. So any further feedback? What other ways, apart from the very powerful point that Holly has mentioned, are there other legal mechanisms that can protect survivors and victims of abuse?
I would just say, from experience, I think that where they can't do a non-harassment order, because it's not possible in every case, where someone's been charged, quite often the police will ask the victim if they want any special bail conditions. Sometimes the fiscal will look to see if there's anything they can do in that regard, because where somebody breaches their bail conditions, that will be put as an aggravator on top of the already domestic abuse charge. So in some way it's kind of some sort of protection, but where they haven't put any, where it's just like standard bail conditions, the victim can ask for specific conditions to be put on. So like for them not to enter a property or to not be contacted by any sort of means, which is another way that they can get some sort of protection.
That's another very brilliant point. Thank you, Zara. Thank you very, very much for that. It's very important. Remember this. Yes.
Sorry, I was just adding. Last year, the Scottish government ran a consultation on the effectiveness of the protective orders for those of experiencing domestic abuse. And in October 2019, they introduced emergency barring orders, where in the situation of immediate danger, a perpetrator of domestic violence can vacate the residence of the victim. But I believe this is still not in place, but this was introduced. I'm not sure if it is definitely is up and running, but I think this was introduced at that point in time. So I'm not sure if this is yet up and running. I believe it's still something they are thinking of doing, which was introduced. I'm not sure if anyone has more on that as well, but that is one good thing as well, which can help vacate the abuser from the house sooner than later, so that there's less of abuse is controlled at that point.
Thank you so much. Thank you for that. I think that's worth noting and double checking as well. It's very important that we look into the aspect of protective order, especially for the children. You mentioned that, or you had a point that children could be used as pawn which shouldn't be. Children should never be used as pawns or victims at all. So we should look into that as well. So any other comments or questions from anyone that you just want to address? Okay. The other aspect, which I think is what remembering as well, you did mention when we were talking about the different brief series of implications, you touched on, there were key points that you mentioned. You said the financial and emotional abuse needs to be better articulated. So I want to re-echo that point, that financial and emotional abuse need to be better articulated. You mentioned that policies which affect benefits, debt, or housing need to better consider the needs of victims of abuse. I think that is important as well. And you said that despite different policy areas considering victims' needs, despite different policy areas considering victims' needs, policy commitment need to be evident on the ground is important as well. And you said that government must monitor the impact. Government must monitor the impact the single payment policy has on domestic abuse. So there are several aspects that policies have to be addressed properly. You said financial institutions must develop consistent guidelines to allow victims to de-entangle their assets from abusers safely. And then you also mentioned another point, which is critical, that civil societies need to be better equipped to recognize, support, and refer victims to victims of domestic abuse. So these are important points to remember in making sure that we have a very formidable framework that can protect victims and survivors of domestic abuse. Are there other points, anyone, even if it's not currently in place, things you feel that the law hasn't captured properly and you feel it should be captured, or things that are already in existence but need to be tweaked better to make sure it is improved? Are there any things, any comment? It doesn't need to be legal. Anything that can be very supportive of the situation.
There was a point that she made about, which you have already mentioned, that abuse is not about the location, but about the relationship between the two parties involved. So when she mentioned that, I actually took it, I wrote it down as a note in my notes. I was just wondering, so what, because I've been thinking about this also before now. What about workplace abuse, and how much has been put in place from the legal system in terms of law? What do we have? So I'm just wondering, maybe one of these days, if we can be helped with a topic on workplace abuse.
I think that's important to look into. Like you said, workplace abuse, it happens in different forms, in different guise, and then we have to make it. I think we may have to dedicate the time into that, but it is quite generic and safe to mention that any form of abuse, whether it is at workplace, whether it is at home, whether it is anywhere at all, it's unacceptable, and then we have to look into that. So, but the workplace abuse is another category of abuse which is different from domestic abuse. So we have to critically look at that. Does anyone want to put in any feedback, any general thought, initial thought before we do something about it?
I was just thinking when Abiola was saying about location and everything like that, because when you've got abuse, you need to have a plan if you're going to leave. And I was just thinking, with all this COVID-19 and everything being closed and that, people will have to make sure that their passports are in date, because a lot of things have gone on through the lockdown, hasn't it? So I wonder if that could be put in for, like, when you're making a plan, whenever you're counselling somebody to make a plan to have different things packed, that they make sure that their passport is in date, because nobody's been able to travel anywhere. A lot of people may not have looked at their passports. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's a very important point you just made there, because your passport is your identity, and you need that for travels, especially during this pandemic. What support can be gotten in that regard? If you've got your passport expired and you cannot go out to renew, what sort of things that victims and survivors need to know, I think is important to highlight. It's your primary identity. If you claim to be someone and you don't have a passport to prove that who you are, yeah, I think it's important. I agree, unless someone else has a contrary view. So, any further? Thank you, Camilla, for that. Thank you. We pick that on board. Yeah, thank you. Any other feedback? Anything that struck us from the discussion? We have about 6 minutes to wrap up this session, and then the private session for anyone who has indicated interest to discuss with our team member. We kickstart in a different room or different rooms. So, but for now, it's just worth highlighting, if no one has questions or comments, that seeking for help is not a sign of weakness. You should seek for help and speak out. Karuna mentioned the campaign that was launched by the Home Office. You're not a lone campaign. We welcomed that campaign when it was launched. We, in fact, wrote the Home Office to acknowledge the fact that that campaign is something that needs to be sustained. And so it's important to mention you're not alone. You're not weak if you seek for help, and that there are support mechanisms in law. There are avenues and remedies that you can have recourse to protect you and protect the children. The aspect of children, very important to protect them, and to also remember that the location of the abuse doesn't matter. If you are in doubt as to what the law is, please get in touch with us, get in touch with necessary charity, the appropriate charities, and then you will be directed. Never suffer in silence. Don't suffer in silence. Speak up. Speak up. And if you know someone as well who is been abused or who is going through a very turbulent time, please, you also can be a good Samaritan and signpost people like that. Get in touch with the police, especially when life is in danger. So yeah, I think that's some of my general statement. Any last words, few comments from Karuna or anyone, just to wrap up this session for today?
Just one question from me for Karuna, but you may not know the answer to this one. But I was really intrigued about the point around how when people are claiming universal credit or benefits, often it's paid into one individual who, and then I guess it kind of enables them to have financial control over a household. So I wondered, is this something that has perhaps been kind of recognised by our government and local authorities that it's an issue? And are there perhaps any conversations going on at the moment around how this is almost kind of an enabler and what we can kind of do to rectify
it? I am exactly not sure if it's something which has been picked up by the government, but obviously government has recognized that obviously there are people who are struggling with financial needs. And a lot of times families have joint accounts, sometimes they don't have, so when they are applying for some sort of legal aid or universal credit or some benefits, they are providing details of an account which is either joint, and in a situation of domestic abuse where your accounts are controlled by the abuser, it would be very difficult for the victim to really access the money or the finances. So maybe this is something where I feel government can have a very look into it, so they can find ways of either helping out, giving money in a different form, or asking specifically, say, for example, if the victim is the actual applicant, then asking the victim to have an account so that they know that the money is going directly to the victim and not having joint accounts. I'm not entirely sure how but I know that this is something where they can look into and find ways to ensure the money is going to the right person and the right person is getting access to it as well, if that makes sense.
Cool, thank you.
Thank you for that. Thank you. Thank you, Holly, for that question. And thank you, Karuna, for your feedback as well. Any last words of feedback from anyone?
I just have one quick question. Sorry, I was late to the call, so I don't know if this has been addressed already. But the You Are Not Alone campaign that was introduced during the COVID-19 response by the government, apparently one of the big issues of that is for anyone who's from like an ethnic minority background, Black or Asian, the messaging for this campaign is only in English. I'm wondering if anyone knows, Karuna or anyone else, if this messaging, if there's any plans to kind of widen that and make it in languages that are more accessible than just English, I guess. Apparently that's one of the main problems.
I think I'm not entirely sure if there is some way they are trying to do something, but this is something which has been highlighted, how the law can be better in today's presentation as well, where there are minority hidden victims groups, they might not have English as the first language. So government has to do something where they have to make sure that the communication, what is out there, it's different languages for people to access from all backgrounds, and it is easier, because the first thing when some victim, what they face is to asking for advice or trying to get help, and if the help is not available the way they understand it, it is very difficult for one to really ask for it. They feel already uncomfortable of asking it because they don't understand where to go. So I think that is something which we picked up on the presentation today, on how things can be better in improving. And maybe Lawson, I don't know if anyone else knows more about this particular campaign, the question he's asked about, if wants to share some more light on that.
Thank you so much for that response. Thank you, Karen. That's very, very, very vital question. Like you said, that's one of the challenges of that campaign, which you've just rightly pointed out. There's more that needs to be done in terms of accessible language of that campaign. And we will pick this up and then see, we'll definitely pick this up. And then I mentioned before that we've written to the Home Office about the campaign, and this is something that we will have to write to them again, and then the feedback that we receive from them, we will pass across again. Because like you said, we need to make sure that it's important that diversity and accessibility, every nation, every creed, and everyone should be able to understand and participate and be a beneficiary of the campaign. So, and if the language is not reflective of that, absolutely is something that we're going to pursue. That is the essence of these surgeries, especially this topic, where we can better, how the law and policies can better protect victims and survivors of domestic abuse. And you've just rightly pointed out one of the areas. Thank you so much for that.
No problem. Perfect.
All right, so we just passed 1:01, and that is the time allocated for the general discussions and feedback on this topic for today. But feel free, if you have other concerns, anything that you want us to take note of. We're not just doing these surgeries as a matter of fun. We care really, make sure that we're making impact in the areas that matter and supporting victims and survivors of domestic abuse. So if you have suggestions, ideas, and areas of improvement, please do get in touch with us or any member of the legal support team, and we will be able to work on it quickly. I will invite Reverend Abiola Kran, our manager, to give us a few parting words before we go into the private section.
No, actually, what I wanted to add is that your feedback will be highly appreciated also. We want to know how this is affecting you. So please kindly send us your feedback and what your opinion is. So we're going to be sending this to our YouTube. You can subscribe to our channels so that when we have other events, it may not be this, you can be able to get notice immediately. So thank you, everyone. And we are also very grateful again to our presenter for today. Thank you very much for the time you have taken to put this valuable, priceless access together. Thank you and have a good weekend.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Remember, next week, Saturday, we are
Thank
here.
you.
Thank you.
Yeah, don't get off. How to get I can't get that.